The fantastic thing, the scary thing about travel is that when you go abroad, you meet a plethora of people. But the most important person that, in my experience, you meet when you're abroad is yourself. Hi, my name is Alani. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and a breakthrough life coach with over 11 years experience. I specialize in change and transition, and this channel is for Black women who are going through major life changes, particularly moving abroad. This video is about why I believe it is so necessary for Black females to solo travel on a long-term basis. I feel it's really important for our mental health and our well-being, and that kind of goes beyond just thinking about the relaxation that comes when we sit on a beach, or not having to deal with the stress of our jobs, or all of those kind of things. It goes much deeper. So when we live in the UK or US, like, we're kind of used to being around a particular group of people, whether that's family, whether that's colleagues at work, whether that's friend groups. And quite often it can be really difficult to make new friends, right? Sometimes we can, but generally, for most of us anyway, unless you're someone who is particularly outgoing or particularly forward in seeking out and meeting and making new connections, chances are you've got friend groups that are from way back in the day, sometimes from school, sometimes from childhood, from birth. And those are fantastic connections to have. And I'm by no means saying, dash away your friends. They're great relationships to have, but the people around us are our mirrors. They reflect back to us the things that we learn about ourselves. In our interactions with people, how we deal with them, how they deal with us, how we treat them, how they treat us, the things we say, all of that is reflecting back to us on a continuous basis information about ourselves. But while this is great, if we're continuously around the same set of people from years, decades ago, we're getting the same feedback. We're having the same mirrors held up to our faces all the time. And that is hampering our ability to get new feedback and to grow in new ways. So I think it's really important for us to allow ourselves to get new mirrors. Traveling the world puts you in front of people from all walks of life. So living in the UK, I have my community around me. I see the same people in the supermarket. I interact with my neighbors in the same way. My friend group is kind of the same. So I'm interacting with the same people in the same ways all the time. Sometimes there are new people, but generally that group is the same. But when you travel, you interact with people from all walks of life. You're put outside of your comfort zone, outside of that group of people, that type of people that you usually would be around. And that means you're getting a rich, diverse range of mirrors reflecting things back to you. And I'm not talking about just about how people treat us. I'm talking about when you interact with somebody from a completely different place, what you get, what you internalize from that relationship is completely enriching. Quite often in our lives, we get into routines, and routines are necessary. Our brains love routines. Our brains love putting ourselves in situations where we know the terrain and we know what's going to happen. We like predictability. It's safe for us, right? And that's great. It's fine to be in a predictable situation for a time. But every now and again, we need a shake-up. We need to experience something new outside of our comfort zone, because it's outside of our comfort zone where the growth happens. There's nothing like being in a new country on your own. One of my earliest memories was on my first solo travel. And the first place I landed in Cancun, first of all, and I moved over to Playa del Carmen. And I remember being in Playa del Carmen, and I wasn't in the massively hotel-y kind of touristy area. I was staying with a local that I had met online, not anything dodgy, right? I was staying with a teacher that I had met online, and she'd rented me out a room in her house. Fantastic woman, Marta, love you. But I remember that first day walking out of the house and feeling, okay, now I'm on my own. And of course, straight away, a whole host of things happened. Everything went wrong. My mobile phone stopped working. I went to the cash point because I was young, okay? I had $10 in my pocket. So I thought, go to the cash point. I went to the cash point. They blocked my card. The other cards were in the house. I didn't have a key yet. So I had to quickly communicate with people about my needs, get some help. It wasn't a great situation. But I say that to say that there's nothing like being in a situation where you have to communicate outside of your comfort zone. And I'm not saying you have to be in a situation where things go wrong, but just being in a situation where you need to go and speak to somebody. I remember the first time that I went to a bar by myself, and I was outside of my comfort zone. I mean, now it's like nothing, it's water for ducks back. But at that time, it was such a huge thing for me. And I would never have been able to overcome that milestone if I never took the leap of going away on my own. Sometimes it can be really difficult to do new things in our current existence. We know the people around us, we know the community around us, and there are barriers to doing new things in our current communities. We can do them, but sometimes it can be really difficult. So going to a place where nobody know your name, nobody knows who you are, no one knows what you do, you're anonymous. You can step forward in any way you want to. When talking about fear, I also want to talk about facing fears, and actually the much deeper level of facing fears. Largely, a lot of our ancestors were nomadic, and this was just part of a way of life. No, not all of our ancestors did that, but a large number did. And so we have a deep soul connection to travel. And I'm not talking, and when I say travel again, I'm not talking about just going on holiday to a resort. I'm talking about that boots on the ground, discovering a new place, tapping into your inner explorer, ignites something on a soul level. Even deeper than that, our ancestors engaged in rites of passage, ceremonies, rituals that marked out phases in our lives. They were demarcations of moving from one stage and phase of your life and into another. For example, I had the absolute privilege of living with the Samburu tribe in Kenya, where I worked on a TV show with the BBC many moons ago, it was 20 years now, where they took me and some other people to Kenya to live with the Samburu tribe, to build a game reserve, deal with wildlife and the animals. It was the most phenomenal experience of my life. On that trip, we were living with the tribes people, and we got to know the Moran warriors. And what the Moran warriors would do is when they would get to a certain age, they would go on the equivalent of a bushwalk. So they would separate from their families and travel around in the bushland on their own for months on end, where you go and you find yourself out on your own in the wilderness. And it really is an important rite of passage that takes these warriors, that took our ancestors from one stage and phase of their life to the next. Now, for us, unfortunately, the way that life is today, we've lost touch and lost sight of many of our rituals, our ceremonies that would demarcate these phases of life. But engaging in long-term travel can be our own way of resetting, shifting, leveling up in our own personal evolution. We can be doing what is the equivalent of the Moran warriors going on their bushwalk and being on their own in the bushlands for 6 months or however long they were. And they would come back to their tribes after the 6 months or however long, and they would be seen as a much more mature and evolved member of society because of all the things that they would learn about themselves while they're traveling. And I think this is such an important factor to think about when we think of travel. It's not just about seeing new people and experiencing new places. It's about all the things that we engage in within ourselves on a personal level that allows us to tap into something deeper, richer, bigger than ourselves. And it allows us to level up and push forward in our own personal evolution. The fantastic thing, the scary thing about travel is that when you go abroad, you meet a plethora of people. You meet people from all walks of life, people who you would never, ever otherwise encounter. But the most important person that, in my experience, you meet when you're abroad is yourself. It's an opportunity to experience yourself in a completely new way. And it's wonderful. Now, this all sounds like things that are great for young folk. If you're in your 20s, yeah, that's fine. You can go and you can travel abroad. Or if you're in your 30s and you can quit your job, that's fine. But if you're in your 40s or your 50s or your 60s, then it's a different thing. No. Travel nowadays is possible for all Black women. I think it's necessary for all Black women, no matter what stage or phase of life you are in. If you can create the circumstances for you to long-term travel, get out there, travel, do the thing. It's not just for young people. The world is out there for all of us. Another reason why I think it's so important for Black women to travel the world is to have a different experience of Blackness. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the Western world, in the UK, in the US, we experience being Black in a particular way. And it's often not positive. And I'm not saying that being Black is a negative thing, absolutely not. Largely, our identity as Black people is not necessarily about us celebrating ourselves, but is more so about our otherness. When I traveled the world and I experienced going to countries where I wasn't mistreated, where my Blackness, well, it wasn't even that my Blackness, well, actually in Egypt, my Blackness was celebrated. It gave me a new experience of being Black. I will never forget when we went to Egypt, and I know some people have different experiences in Egypt, but mine was phenomenal. We went to Egypt and literally the ground we walked on was worship. Like we had people coming up to us, just calling us queens, calling us beautiful. But we also had women coming up to us. I never forget, there was a woman in Egypt and we were in Cairo, and this woman and her children came to us and she cried. She cried and she was touching my face and she was saying, "You're so beautiful. I love seeing Black people. It's so good to see Black." And I was like, whoa, it was phenomenal. But being abroad, and especially being in countries where you are not mistreated for your skin color, but in fact, your skin color is celebrated, you are embraced. Oh, it is mind-blowing. And it really showed me that our experience, our narrative on Blackness in the Western world is completely skewed. We have a completely warped sense of what beauty is. I think we're getting better at it and it's changing, which is great. I think we've got a way to go in terms of celebrating our Blackness, and travel can really help you do that. It can shift your own perception of your own beauty and show you that you are a wondrous, beautiful Black woman that should be celebrated all the days of your life. So trusting your inner guidance and your inner compass. When we live in our lives, in our home countries, generally we create cushy lives. We create routines, systems that almost put us on autopilot. Have you ever, for example, driven home from work and got home and thought to yourself, I don't even remember driving home. Or waking up in the morning and thinking, did I brush my teeth this morning? Like, I could feel the mint, but I don't remember brushing my teeth. We're on autopilot, which means that we're not connected to our actual experience on the ground. We're completely somewhere else. And we're missing opportune moments to experience life. When you're in a new country, your awareness is completely raised. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of awareness that we have in our home countries, which actually tends to be hypervigilance. I'm talking about the awareness of our surroundings, being in awe of our surroundings. I remember being in Mexico and watching the sunrise on one of the ancient ruins and just being in awe in the most breathtaking situation, just seeing this and thinking, how? This is phenomenal. It's those moments where we are so in touch with life that we don't have in our everyday lives in the UK or the US or wherever we're from. And so travel allows us to engage in life, engage in connections with people in a deep and meaningful way. And that reinvigorates us. It keeps us, it keeps us excited about life. One of the real important factors or important parts of long-term travel is that because you're removed from your normal everyday routine of life, you're put in a situation where you get to reassess all of the components of yourself and your life. And you quickly start to see all the bits that just no longer serve you. All of the ways of being, attitudes, thoughts, behaviors that you've carried that maybe weren't even your own or just from your family or work culture that aren't actually in alignment with your true beliefs and your true feelings about life. And so you get to do this complete reassessment of yourself in the most beautiful way. And of course, we could do that while we're at home, but it's really difficult to do that when you're in the same situation, again, with those same mirrors. You get feedback from different people. One of the other things that is also really phenomenal that we get to do is just to witness different ways of living. For so long, I believed that going to university, getting a job, staying in your job, building your career, buying a house, having two born children, doing the thing was the way of life. And if you were successful at that and you did it well, you'd be happy. Well, when I did those things, actually the happiness never came. My most deepest moments of joy have sometimes been when I've been in the most randomest of places, with the most randomest of people, doing some random stuff. It's phenomenal. One of the most phenomenal moments that I've had was in Mexico a few years ago. I was in a small town called Mazunte in Oaxaca. It's beautiful, go. And we were on top of this small cliff called Punta Cometa. And it was nighttime. We hiked all the way up there. And it was a full moon, a supermoon, and an eclipse. So when it's a supermoon, the moon is huge, right? The moon is at its closest point to the earth. So it looks massive, like almost like you could touch it. And we were on top of this cliff and watching this eclipse happen right in front of our eyes. There was a whole group of us. It was like life stood still for a moment. And I was so connected. And not to say that I'm usually disconnected, that's not the case, but it was like, it was just, everything was amplified in that moment. And yes, I could have experienced that supermoon anywhere in the world. There was something about the place, the time, the space, the people that just made that experience one of the most touching moments of my travels. And it's moments like this that you just don't get usually in your everyday life. And they are life-changing. It changed my life so much. I even got a tattoo of that moment. And my travels are filled with so many of these moments, so many of these moments. I'll never forget when I was in St. Helena, where I lived for 4 years, a tiny island in the South Atlantic, and I swam with whale sharks. And I swam with this whale shark that wouldn't leave me alone. It was huge. This thing was massive. And there was just little dinky me in this ocean, almost on top of this whale shark. This thing was like, I couldn't even imagine how big it was. You know, it was huge. Or when we swam, we thought our friend was going to die from a shark, and it turns out it was a devil ray. And we all got in and we swam with this devil ray that was about the size of this room. It was huge. Like, travel is filled with so many of these inspiring moments. And no, life isn't all about those moments, but if we can inject them into our lives, they can just enrich our experience tenfold, 20-fold, 100-fold. Oh, chef's kiss, they're so beautiful. The other thing about why I think Black women should travel is because it widens the dating pool. So we know we live in the Tinder age where we're swiping and swiping. So if you are someone who is dating and you travel abroad, you may find that your qualified leads of who you're dating is much broader. So you can interact with people from all walks of life, and you can try out all kinds of flavors if you so choose. But I found that dating abroad was really phenomenal because it meant that I was dating people who had a completely different take on life, completely different relationship with their families, with themselves, with their work. And it gave me a completely new type of relationship that I'd never had before. It didn't all work out, but they were great learning experiences. One of the other things that travel abroad allowed me to do is to soften. It was only when I got abroad, I really realized that I walk in the UK with an armor. And it's an unconscious armor that I put on every day when I go out in the UK. And it's an armor of protection against the harshness, the hard edges that I spoke about. When I went abroad, I really got to realize that there's no need for that harshness anymore. There's no need for that armor in the same way. And I can experience myself in a different way. And once we take off that armor, we can really start to open our hearts and actually connect to ourselves in the world and people in a completely new way. I never forget when, after I'd lived abroad for 4 years and I came back and I went to the supermarket, a well-known pharmaceutical supermarket not supermarket, but a well-known pharmaceutical store in the UK, something to do with shoes. And I was fresh off the boat back in the UK, and I was buying nail varnish. And I'd picked up these nail varnishes and I'd put them in my hand, and I was walking around the store with them in my hand like this. And I caught myself, and I was kind of questioning myself, why am I carrying the nail varnish like this? And I realized unconsciously what I was doing was tapping into old behaviors. I was so used to being followed around by security guards, thinking that because I'm Black, I'm stealing from their store, that I had just walked around with the stuff in my hand like this to show them, like, no, I'm not stealing. And it wasn't a conscious thing at all. It was just this thing of being back in the UK and knowing that because I'm Black, I'm assumed to be a thief. Because I'm Black, I will be followed around the supermarket. Now, that's just a small example, but it really highlighted for me how life in the UK really leaves you with this armor. And when you travel long term and you experience different cultures and your Blackness isn't seen as a threat, you can really soften and you can really interact with people in heartfelt ways that don't leave you vulnerable. One of the absolute benefits of traveling abroad is just being treated well. How affirming it is when we go to a place and just because we're treated well. It's nothing to do with money, status, skin color. It's just because you are a human being, you're treated well. So I really hope that this video highlights the importance of traveling for Black women. And this is like at any age. It's not about doing it at a particular age or a particular stage, but it's about saying, hey, look, I value myself enough to give myself a new experience, to experience myself in a different way. So I think we could all do well to give ourselves permission to do that. It's a loving act of self-care. Travel, get on the road, grab your backpack, grab your suitcase, jump on a plane, get out there, do the thing, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. It's been fantastic.